So I've taken over from Mr. Breer, who I think is heading to the bar for his well-earned pint, and I'll take over the second part of the interview with Chris. I guess we've seen mobile phone usage and smartphone capabilities really radically change what it's like to live in the Western world in a very short period of time. What are your views on that? You know, where are we seeing that lead?
Well, it's not just in the Western world, but it's certainly these days you can't imagine anybody not having a mobile phone. And yet when they first came out in the late 1970s, most people said it's just for idiots or yuppies or people that, you know, are just trying to show off. I don't need one. Now it's essential. And it's so essential that you'll know immediately if you don't have your mobile phone with you. Because it's almost like an extension of you. It's part of your body. It's part of how you live. And that's what's making us almost like a cyborg. So downstream, you know, technologies that integrate into our biological capabilities, actually internalizing technologies, the idea of chipping children so you can track and trace where they are, and the idea of having a chip inside you that identifies you so that you can walk through airports without passports or without border controls. Sounds ridiculous, but you never see anybody in Star Trek produce an identification document or, you know, paper. It's all wireless, it's all digitalized. And in particular, I think the major transformation of the mobile smartphone, obviously for us, is putting the internet in our pockets and purses, but for people in the plains of Kenya or in China, it's actually leapfrogged their lives into a new world. So I talk about a lot of European and American markets being quite legacy, because we still have a lot of the old industrial era structures and processes around us, like KYC onboarding in a bank. Whereas when you look at China, you know, last year $5.5 trillion transacted through mobile wallets in 2016, versus America that's like $111 million. You know, you can see these are countries that are leapfrogging with mobile.
Yeah, you see that that move from a country, a geography that has those inbuilt systems that have evolved and are performing very well. And suddenly these new countries, new geographies are coming along, taking advantage of the new opportunities that technology affords, and then not having to be just a little bit better than the technologies that come before, but actually leapfrogging, as you say. And I understand you went and did a case study with Ant Financial. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I am fascinated by Ant Financial.
Yeah, I mean, Ant Financial became a 30,000 word case study in the book. And it's the first English language case study on the company that's been produced. There's lots of, you know, books about Alibaba, but there's not been one about Ant Financial specifically and Alipay. And there's just a whole range of things that they said to me that are mind-blowing compared to what you see in Europe and America when you talk to banks or even fintech startups, because they're reimagining everything. So for example, I met the head of systems architecture for Ant Financial, who came from Microsoft, in fact, but he's Chinese by background. And the first thing he said to me is that he's been brought in to manage the 5th generation systems architecture. So I'm going 5th generation architecture. You're only 14 years old as a company. So on average, every 3 or 4 years, Ant Financial is throwing away their whole architecture and regenerating, which you never hear any other company really doing that in that way. Then he described why they're doing the 5th generation architecture, which is because they currently have 540 million users doing 125,000 transactions per second. And they want to build the next generation to support 2 billion users doing 1 million transactions per second, with every transaction using artificial intelligence for fraud and risk and analytics of exactly where are their exposures. So every transaction, which is a microtransaction quite often, is being analyzed by algorithms with no human hand involved. And it is a wow. It's kind of, you know, when you think of Visa and MasterCard, they look like they're small fry by comparison to what Ant's doing. And equally, their vision is quite amazing in that they're now going global. So they have partnerships across Asia. They are the backbone behind Paytm in India. They're coming over here into Europe, not supporting Chinese tourists, which is what we think they're doing as a strategy, but as eventually becoming the mobile wallet of the world. Yeah. You know, a great example is I was with ePazi, which is the partner of Ant Financial in Finland, and what they wanted to do is to have Ant Financial Alipay being able to be used in Lapland for Father Christmas for Chinese tourists. Do they believe in Father Christmas? Apparently they do. So 55,000 tourists came in 2016. By 2020, 8 million will come to Finland. Across all of Finland, you can use the mobile wallet Alipay as a Chinese tourist. But I said to Ristu, who's the CEO of ePasi, why don't you put a Finnish or Norwegian or Swedish front end on Alipay, and then I could use it everywhere? Because right now they've got a problem in the Nordic region, which is I can fly into Copenhagen airport and use mobile pay, but if I go 60 kilometers to Malmo in Sweden, I can't use it. But Chinese tourists can come 6,000 kilometers from Beijing or Shanghai and use the same app. And he said, you know what, that's exactly what we're doing. We're going to put local version front ends on Alipay, so all the people in Nordic can use Alipay.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about it before in FinTech Insiders, that there seems to be this really simple path to global domination. You know, do China, do it phenomenally well, get massive scale, then convince all of the other countries and geographies that there's lots of Chinese tourists. You should really take this new payment scheme, and then it's a pretty simple step from there to say, oh, this payment scheme is already in that geography. Let's start, providing it to the end consumers, which I guess is a fairly simple approach.
Well, in fact, in the book, there's 5 key interviews which are documented. So there's the head of strategy, the head of systems architecture, the head of global expansion, and also one specific one which I thought was very interesting was the guy who was the first guy who coded anything in Alipay. He wrote the first code in 2003, and I didn't realize the first generations of Alipay was purely an escrow service to allow merchants who didn't trust consumers to deal with consumers who didn't trust merchants, but they trusted Alibaba. And that's how it was all created. And it was all based on really old technologies, fax machines. It's quite incredible.
So is there, from your interviews there, did you sense that they had a different way of working from the banks that you know so well?
Well, there's a phrase that floats around at 11FS quite often, which is get shit done. And that's what Ant Financial does. It just gets it done. It's what the Chinese do. They just get it done. And they're not a Chinese company, really. They are a global platform. I was at the Taobao annual conference for Alibaba as part of my experience of doing the case study where Jack Ma was presenting on stage. And at one point, he was asked the question, how do you run Alibaba as a company? He said, well, we're not a company. We're an ecosystem of platforms and players, and my role is to be the governor of that ecosystem, to be the president, to make sure it operates in an ethical and appropriate fashion. And a lot of people don't trust the Chinese, and this is something else that came out of the conversation. But why? Because they don't speak our language. Everyone's speaking English, but how many Europeans or Americans speak Chinese? So there's a suspicion about the Chinese. But what I learned with Ant Financial and Alibaba is actually they're far more ethical and focused on sustainability than any other company I've met on a globalized basis. So for example, there's part of the case study is to map the ant forest, where every time you make a payment, you can plant a tree towards a better system of cleansing the planet from more oxygenation. You don't hear these things because they're not reported, because they're Chinese.
So was there anything else that surprised you, that going over you were expecting to see or not expecting to see, that really grabbed you while you were there?
Well, the reason I picked them is that I'd heard Eric Jing, the CEO of Ant Financial, at the World Economic Forum in 2017, saying that they wanted to have 2 billion people on their platform using artificial intelligence and distributed ledgers to make sure it's a automated platform for the world. And what surprised me, I guess, is that they're not trying to take over the world as ants. What they're trying to do is export their experiences and their technological capabilities to local partners. And that's the key part of the strategy. So Paytm is not the Alipay of India, it's the Paytm of India, powered by experiences that they've imported from Ant Financial. And the same is true of Kakao Pay in Korea, or of Ascent Money in Thailand, or of Globe Telecom in Philippines. And I guess the reason why that's different is no other company, American, European or Asian, had expanded on that financial inclusion strategy until Ant Financial started to do it. The fact they've done it first makes it very difficult for WeChat to do it, because Ant Financial's got the partners. It makes it very difficult for PayPal to do it, because Ant Financial got there first. And that's the reason why it's a critical case study in the book, because the book's all about the fourth revolution of humanity includes everybody, and from a financial inclusion viewpoint, the company that's got there first is Ant.
So do you think that that platform, those underlying rails, is arguably more of a threat to Visa, MasterCard, to that kind of thing, than it is to banks that sit around the world? Or who is Ant's competitor? What market are they really in?
Well, the market they're in is creating the next generation financial service. And so I often talk about the issue I have today with Monzo, Starling, Atom, or any other challenger, is that they are not thinking outside the box. What they're doing is making cooler digital versions of what the banks do and making it less frictionful and much easier and convenient. That's a faster horse in my view. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's a good thing, because we need faster horses. But what Ant's doing, in my view, is creating the next generation car, vehicle, financial service. So for example, the merchants on Taobao, some of the most high volume merchants get 300,000 loans a year, ranging from anything from what would be 10 cents to $10,000. But these are not loans in the way we think of them. What they are is assisting their working capital, because Alipay is a escrow service. So the merchant doesn't get the money until the consumer ticks the box. And what Ant Financial is doing is saying, we'll give you the money up front. Forget about waiting for the consumer to tick the box, because we think you're good for the money on a 3-day, 4-day, 5-day, 14-day loan from 10 cents to $10,000, depending on what it was. So micro loans, micro savings, micro payments, micro investments, as well as macro payments, macro savings, macro investments, are all transacting to the same platform, because it costs you no more with technology to do a $10,000 payment as it does a 10-cent payment. And that's what I don't think banks or some of the fintech startups get, which is the imagination to reinvent the whole world of money rather than just trying to get faster digital money.
So you've got a good view of China, what's happening with there. You travel the world, you see the US and Asia and Europe and what's going on there. How do you see this playing out in the next few years?
Well, I'm very excited about everything I see in the world, because I love traveling, and that's where a lot of the experiences of the book have come from. I think we have this fundamental challenge in Europe and America, which is we've built a last century infrastructure that we are trying to maintain rather than to break it apart. And eventually we're going to have to do it. We're just going to have to bite the bullet and say, all this legacy shit is just got to go. We have to move on. And the reason we'll have to do that is that China, Africa, Latin America are moving on. And what's fascinating is South-South trade rather than North Hemisphere trade. I think it's really best illustrated by Dubai. I've been going to Dubai now for 15 years. And I just remember when I first went there was maybe 20, 30 tall buildings. And then cranes everywhere, and skyscrapers going up everywhere. And then the global crisis hit, and Nakheel, almost went under, and Abu Dhabi had to bail out Dubai just as the Burj Khalifa was finished. And I was sitting there at that point, 2009, 2010, and thinking, they built all this empty space. No one's ever going to fill it, because where will they come from? But they're there. When I first went to Dubai in 2003, I could have bought a property on a palm for about $300,000. I was there just in holiday this year. That property is now $3 million. And Dubai, to me, is where you see this vision of the future. It's at the leading edge of everything. They're going to have the whole of the Dubai economy run on a distributed ledger by 2020. They just get things done, and that's what you see in China. That's what you see in the Southern Hemisphere, and that's where we're going to rock the world, because we're going to see the Southern Hemisphere dominating in the next 10, 20, 30 years, and the Northern Hemisphere breaking itself apart to try and keep up.
Wow, so is that a dystopian future, or I guess it depends which hemisphere you live in?
Well, we were just talking about dystopian versus utopian, because by the time we get to that vision, we'll probably find that Trekonomics kicks in and no one's bothered about wealth anymore anyway.
So finally, and maybe most importantly, when does the book come out? Can people pre-order, and where do people, order it and find out more about you?
They can order everything online in the normal spaces. I use Amazon. It's on Amazon right now for pre-order. There's a book launch on March the 19th at the Innovate Finance Global Summit, and also at Barclays Rise here in London, where I'll be doing a book signing. And you can find details of that on fsclub.net if you want to come to the Barclays Rise meeting or Innovate Finance Global Summit. And then on April 12th and 13th, we're doing a New York launch. where there's a private launch in the evening of April the 12th. And if you want to come to that, just DM me on Twitter or Facebook, or on April the 13th at the EFMA conference in New York. And then there's going to be lots of other events around this, like Money 2020 in Asia and Europe, where we'll also be doing book signings and launches. Because to be honest, I was very proud of how successful Digital Bank was. I was really pleased with ValueWeb, but I think this one smashes it.
Fantastic. I look forward to reading it.
Thanks, Jason.